The grand halls of the Archarian Council shimmered with soft blue lights, their glass-like walls glowing with energy harvested from the stars. Representatives from hundreds of alien species filled the room, their voices a mix of tones, hums, and clicks as they debated one of the most troubling topics of recent times: humanity. The humans, newcomers to the galaxy, had climbed the ladder of power with shocking speed. In only a few galactic cycles, they had moved from being observed with curiosity to becoming a subject of fear and debate. Some called them unpredictable, others dangerous. But many in the council, especially the arrogant Veltrax, laughed at the idea that a primitive species from a forgotten spiral arm could ever be a threat. They were strong, yes, but strength without experience was nothing. The Veltrax Prime Delegate stood up, his scaled face sneering as he declared that humanity needed to be reminded of their place, and that if the galaxy waited too long, the humans might begin to think they were equal to the older, wiser species. His voice echoed across the chamber, filled with pride, but behind that pride was fear, the kind of fear that makes fools act fast. It was decided without full consensus, but the Veltrax needed no permission. Within days, their war fleet moved toward a small human colony called Epsilon 12, a scientific outpost, barely armed and completely unprepared for war. The attack was quick and brutal. Orbital strikes melted entire research stations. Hundreds of scientists, doctors, and civilians were wiped out before they could send more than a single distress signal. The Veltrax left behind nothing but smoking rubble and a single message: remember your place. They thought the humans would submit. They thought Earth would beg for peace. They thought wrong. Back on Earth, the United Human Nations received the signal, and for the first time in decades, all human factions stood together without argument. There was no call for revenge, no cry for war, just silence. It was the kind of silence that made the stars themselves feel cold. A single message was sent to the Archarian Council, short and terrifying in its simplicity: we are coming. That was all. No threats, no emotion, just a statement. The Veltrax laughed when they heard it. Other species, older and wiser, did not. Whispers began to move through the stars, from one corner of the galaxy to the next. Stories long buried began to resurface, stories of human resilience, of impossible survival, of the Terran wars when humans nearly destroyed themselves and yet came out stronger. The oldest species, the silent observers who had watched for eons without interference, began to close their gates. They remembered what humanity was capable of when pushed too far. As days passed, the Veltrax prepared for what they believed would be a minor retaliation, perhaps a few ships, maybe a fleet. They stationed heavy forces around their nearest colonies and increased their patrols. They believed they were ready. But nothing came. Not a single ship, not even a probe. Weeks turned into a month, and the Veltrax grew confident again. They even celebrated their victory on the anniversary of the Epsilon 12 attack. But deep in the void, far from any watching eye, the humans were not celebrating. They were calculating, planning, preparing something not out of rage, but of cold, focused intention. They had heard the screams from Epsilon 12. They had seen the burned remains of their people, and they had decided that there would be no warning when they arrived. There would be no second chances. Across every human system, fleets began to move in silence. Not for display, not for fear, but for purpose. The finest minds of Earth, Mars, and the outer colonies came together. Military AI systems ran simulations faster than thought. Black Ops units gathered intelligence deep inside Veltrax space, unseen and unheard. And while the rest of the galaxy debated and delayed, the humans were already on the move. The Veltrax didn't see them coming because they weren't looking in the right direction. They didn't understand what they had done. This wasn't a war they had started. It was a nightmare, and it had just been born. Back in the council chambers, tensions grew. Delegates who once mocked humanity now stayed silent during meetings. The observers, who never interfered in galactic politics, sent a rare transmission to the council: you must stop them now or step aside. But it was too late. The spark of arrogance had already become a fire, and that fire was now racing through the stars. Earth did not move like a conqueror. It moved like something far worse, something that had been wounded and decided to never be vulnerable again. The Veltrax thought they had power, but they had no idea what true power looked like until they saw it flying toward them fast, cold, and without mercy. On the edge of known space, a Veltrax scout ship detected something strange. Thousands of small signals, all synchronized, all heading in one direction. Within seconds, those signals became shapes. And those shapes were human warships, sleek, dark, and carrying weapons that glowed with silent fury. No hails, no warnings, just movement. The scout ship tried to run, but before it could send a full message, it was gone, erased by a precision strike that left not even debris behind. The message was clear, even in silence. The deadliest species in the galaxy wasn't coming for negotiation. It was coming for justice. The galaxy waited in uneasy silence, like a predator-filled jungle holding its breath before a sudden, violent hunt. After the attack on Epsilon 12 and the simple human response, "We are coming," something changed across the stars. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. But it was deeply unsettling. Trade routes that passed near human systems suddenly became quieter. Human diplomats vanished from interplanetary meetings without explanations. Even their famous news networks, which once broadcasted updates from every corner of space, went dark. Earth had gone silent, and that silence screamed louder than any threat. The Veltrax celebrated their strike as a message of dominance, unaware that the real message had already been delivered, and it was written in silence, in darkness, and in preparation. While the Veltrax displayed their military strength with parades and speeches, humans prepared for something that had no name, something that couldn't be stopped once it began. Their silence was not fear, it was focus. Quiet was their war song, and the galaxy would soon learn what that meant. Inside the hidden war rooms on Mars, Earth, and the asteroid cities orbiting Saturn, leaders, generals, and AI war planners worked around the clock. Nothing was rushed. Nothing was missed. Every soldier chosen for the coming mission had been trained not just in battle, but in survival, adaptation, and decision-making under fire. These weren't ordinary soldiers. They were the result of 100 years of warfare, simulations, and crisis training. Each one knew they might not return. None of them hesitated. In deep black zones beyond normal communication range, human fleets regrouped in absolute silence. Drones and stealth scouts moved through enemy territory unseen, mapping every detail of Veltrax defenses, learning weaknesses in their systems, tracking how often their patrols moved, which ships were decoys, and which held real firepower. No other species in the galaxy had seen humans move like this without warning, without trauma. It was like watching a shadow spread across the stars, too silent to be noticed until it touched your skin and you realized it was already too late. In the Arsharian Council, confusion turned into worry. Delegates from peaceful species asked the Veltrax to open peace talks, but the Veltrax refused, convinced that the humans had backed off. They said the humans had shown their weakness by not striking back immediately. They called them cowards. But the old ones, the long-lived species who had seen the rise and fall of empires, began to whisper among themselves. They remembered how humans had once lived on a planet filled with storms, wild beasts, and hostile conditions, and not only survived, but evolved to thrive. They remembered how humans had been written off during their first entry into galactic politics, only to rise and influence faster than any species before them. They remembered the rare times when humans lost something precious, how their grief became fuel for something far worse than revenge. Not rage, but resolve. The observers, ancient beings who rarely spoke at all, sent a short message to the council. "You have awakened what should have slept." Still, the Veltrax laughed. They had fleets, armies, weapons from across the galaxy. They had never lost a war in centuries. To them, the humans were still young, emotional, and overly attached to their colonies. But their mistake was not in attacking a military base. Their mistake was attacking scientists, civilians, and children. They had burned down a place of peace. They had shed innocent blood, and they had left a message behind to mock it. What they didn't realize was that they hadn't simply attacked a human outpost, they had opened a door to something that had been locked away for generations, humanity's full potential in war. And when that door opened, nothing in the galaxy would be able to close it. One by one, the Veltrax colonies near human space began to report strange malfunctions. Sensor disruptions, communication interference, ships disappearing without trace. But no debris was found. No signs of attack. Just silence. Some thought it was equipment failure. Others whispered about invisible fleets. The Veltrax leadership dismissed the reports, saying they were the result of fear-mongering and weak discipline. They believed their strength alone would be enough to stop anything that came their way. But they didn't realize that humanity wasn't just planning an attack. They were designing a message that would not be spoken, but shown in every strike, every battle, every quiet disappearance of Veltrax forces. Humans had no interest in negotiation now. They weren't looking for surrender or apologies. They were preparing to teach a lesson the entire galaxy would remember. Meanwhile, in hidden training zones, far from any known star system, elite human squads trained in full silence. No drills were spoken. Every move was signaled by hand, every mission briefed through neural syncs, every weapon checked and rechecked without a single word. These were not soldiers. These were phantoms of war, prepared to enter enemy space and leave nothing behind. In the silence of those training grounds, a quiet belief formed among the troops not about victory. They weren't going to war because they wanted to. They were going because someone had to make sure the galaxy learned not to mistake kindness for weakness again. Earth didn't want to rule. It never had. But if someone forced them into a corner, they would fight not just to win, but to make sure no one ever tried again. The silence before the storm stretched across star systems. Merchants refused to take routes near Veltrax territory. Independent colonies began building defenses even without permission. Panic began to spread, not because humans had attacked, but because they hadn't. And that was the real horror. The fear of not knowing when or how or where it would start. The galaxy had seen many wars, but never one where the enemy didn't speak. The Veltrax, so used to overwhelming their enemies with noise, pride, and fire, now found themselves staring into the void and seeing nothing, looking back, just the memory of a message: we are coming. And somewhere, in the cold vastness of space, where light from distant stars barely reached, the storm was already moving silent, invisible, and ready to change the galaxy forever. The day the fleet arrived, the stars themselves seemed to pull back in fear. There were no warnings, no announcements, no broadcasts. One moment the Veltrax skies were empty, and in the next, they were filled with shadows so massive that they blocked out entire constellations. These were not ordinary ships. They were shaped like beasts from the darkest dreams, angular, black, and silent. They didn't hum or glow like other vessels. They devoured light, erased sound, and sent a chill through every sensor trying to scan them. Veltrax defense systems blinked, glitched, and then failed completely, unable to identify the energy signatures or weapon types. The humans had arrived, but this was not an army. It was something far worse. This was judgment in the shape of machines. Each ship bore the scars of hundreds of battles, not polished for show, but hardened for destruction. Their surfaces were etched with the names of fallen colonies, not as memorials, but as cold reminders. The humans hadn't come to send a message, they had come to end one. For a moment, no one on the Veltrax capital world moved. The silence from the human fleet felt heavier than any weapon. Even the air in the Veltrax war chambers grew cold as commanders stared at the invasion on their screens. No ship had fired. No human had spoken. But already, the world below knew that something terrible was about to happen. It wasn't just the size of the fleet, it was the design, the intention behind every curve, every turret, every hidden port that seemed to stare down like an eye that had seen too much. The humans had come prepared for total war, and they weren't here to negotiate. The Veltrax scrambled their fleet, launching thousands of ships into the upper atmosphere in a panicked wave. Their admirals shouted orders, declaring that they would crush the invaders and protect their empire. But even as their fleet rose, something was wrong. Their ships, built for show and intimidation, looked small beside the human monsters. Their weapons locked on targets, but the human fleet didn't move. It simply hovered, unmoved by the panic or the aggression, like a predator watching prey that hasn't realized it's already dead. Then, without warning, the first human ship opened its hull not with missiles or lasers, but with silence. A wave of drones, silent and fast, spread out like a dark fog across the Veltrax fleet. They didn't attack immediately. Instead, they shut down systems, hijacked communications, blinded sensors. The Veltrax couldn't see, couldn't speak, couldn't even understand what was happening. Their crews tried to fire, but their targeting systems spun in confusion. And then, the real attack began. One by one, human warships fired beams so precise they cut through armor like paper. No explosions, no fire, just the quiet removal of resistance. Veltrax ships vanished in flashes of white light, erased cleanly from space as if they'd never been there. Human ships moved with terrifying calm, never rushing, never missing. Every shot counted. Every movement was deliberate. This was not chaos. This was execution. On the surface, the Veltrax cities watched in terror as pieces of their once mighty fleet rained down in burning fragments. Their leaders, once loud and proud, stood in silent shock. They had never expected this. They had thought humans would come with anger and noise. But instead they had brought something far more dangerous: cold, perfect discipline. No human faces were shown. No speeches were made. There was no glory in this attack. It was a mission clean, efficient, and terrifying. When the Veltrax planetary shields activated, hoping to stop the fleet from landing, the humans did not fire. They simply transmitted a signal, a silent wave that pulsed through the energy field, and in moments the shield cracked like glass and shattered into falling fragments. Every system the Veltrax had trusted, every defense they had built, failed without a fight. The people began to realize this wasn't just a battle, it was a reckoning. And they weren't facing just humans. They were facing a species that had learned how to make war into an art. A species that had held back for so long, but once pushed, could unleash something the galaxy had never truly seen. Then came the ground drop. Pods from orbit didn't crash with fire. They landed softly, quietly, but once they opened, armored human soldiers stepped out with eyes like steel and weapons unlike anything seen before. They moved with calm precision, not wasting a second. Every objective was taken without delay. Veltrax soldiers who resisted vanished in moments. Those who surrendered were ignored, left behind as the humans passed through cities like ghosts. No looting, no destruction beyond the necessary. This wasn't rage, it was justice, carried out by hands that no longer cared for politics or warnings. In command centers across the Veltrax territories, alarms rang as system after system reported total loss of control. One by one, Veltrax colonies across nearby star systems sent emergency messages. The same shadow fleet had appeared above them too. The same silence. The same unstoppable advance. It wasn't a single attack, it was a coordinated strike across an entire empire. The humans weren't just responding to Epsilon 12. They were dismantling the Veltrax from the inside out. In the final hours of the day, as the last Veltrax orbital command ship fell from the sky, the people of the capital planet looked up and saw something they would never forget. The largest human ship, dark and silent, moved into view above their sky like a god watching judgment below. No voice came from it, but every being who saw it felt the same thing. This was the end of arrogance, the death of pride. Humanity had arrived not as conquerors, but as executioners of justice. They didn't want territory. They didn't want glory. They had come to make sure the galaxy understood one thing: if you started the war, they would end it on their terms. And when they ended it, there would be nothing left to misunderstand. In the dark silence that followed the fall of the Veltrax defenses, questions echoed louder than the sounds of battle ever had. Why were the humans so ruthless? Why did they strike with such precision, such a motionless force, and why had they not spoken a single word even after destroying fleets and capturing cities across the stars? Across what was left of the Veltrax Empire, Minds struggled to understand the terrifying calm of the humans, their silence now more chilling than any weapon. Many had assumed the humans were primitive once, too new to the galactic scene to be a threat, too emotional to master the science of war like the older species had. But everything the Veltrax had believed turned out to be a lie. As the skies cleared of fire and ships, and the human forces quietly held their ground without further destruction, one thing became terrifyingly clear. There was something about humanity that no one had truly known. That mystery was about to be answered, not by force, but by a message that echoed louder than any explosion. In the ruins of the Veltrax capital, a strange structure had been built by the humans, a massive black monolith standing upright in the city center. It looked like a monument, but it was a transmitter, silent at first, until it began to glow with a soft white light. It broadcast a message, not in threats, not in roars, but in a calm human voice. Every language system translated it instantly, and every citizen heard it in their own tongue. It was not a demand for surrender. It was not a warning. It was a truth. The voice told a story not of humans, but of what the galaxy had done to them. It spoke of the Epsilon 12 outpost, destroyed by Veltrax ships, a colony where humans had sent their scientists, farmers, and children, hoping to study a peaceful corner of the galaxy. It had been burned without reason, without cause, just to test how humans would respond. The Veltrax had thought it would be easy, that the humans would cry, negotiate, and move on. But they had misunderstood the human heart. The message explained what humanity had endured long before joining the galactic community, centuries of war on their own world, battles that shaped them into something no one else could predict. Pain had not weakened them. It had prepared them. Loss had not broken them. It had taught them how to rise again, harder, colder, smarter. And now, when faced with the cold betrayal from the Veltrax, they did not scream or rage. They remembered. They planned. They acted. The voice said this was not vengeance, it was a lesson, and a warning. Humanity had finally shown what they truly were when pushed beyond reason. Not monsters. Not mindless destroyers, but survivors, fighters, thinkers who had learned the price of peace and would never again let anyone take it from them. Across the galaxy, every species who heard the broadcast felt something shift. The humans weren't angry anymore. They were focused, and that was far worse. The message went deeper. It spoke of Earth, not as a paradise, but as a crucible where storms, hunger, war, and time forged a species that could adapt to anything. A place where no one was safe unless they learned to protect each other. It spoke of human history of pain and recovery, of nations destroyed and rebuilt, of dreams shattered and reborn. Humanity, the voice said, did not fear death. They had made peace with it long ago. What they feared was injustice. And the Veltrax had committed one that could never be ignored. The humans had not invaded to conquer, but to reveal the truth, that if you shed innocent blood, humans would not forget, and they would not stop until justice had been served. It wasn't just about the fallen colony. It was about sending a message to every empire watching in silence. The time when humanity waited to be accepted was over. Now the galaxy would learn what it meant to provoke them. But even in that chilling message, there was something deeper, something that made the story unforgettable. The voice ended not with a threat, but with an invitation. It said that humanity still believed in peace. But peace must be built on respect, not fear. On truth, not lies. The fleet, though unstoppable, would not move further unless another world made the mistake the Veltrax did. The war was over for now. But the lesson would remain. The humans would not become tyrants. They would not destroy cultures or burn planets. They would stand, unshaken, ready to protect their own with everything they had. And from now on, the galaxy would have to treat humanity with respect, or face the side of them that no one could control once awakened. After the message ended, the monolith went silent. The human soldiers slowly began to withdraw from the cities, vanishing like shadows into their dropships, leaving behind no statues, no flags, no demands. Just silence. and memories of what had happened when a peaceful people were pushed too far. In the aftermath, the Veltrax High Council gathered, their ranks shattered and their spirits crushed. They realized now that they had misunderstood the humans completely. They had mistaken patience for weakness. They had mistaken kindness for cowardice. And they had never imagined that the smiling faces of diplomats and explorers could belong to warriors so fierce that entire fleets couldn't stop them. What frightened them most was not the weapons but the will. Humanity had held back. For years, they had smiled and cooperated. But the moment someone crossed the line, they didn't react with chaos. They responded with precision, with strategy, with a message written in steel and silence. That was the truth of humanity. A species that had learned how to suffer without breaking. A people who believed in justice so deeply that they would cross galaxies to restore it. And now that the truth had been revealed, no one in the galaxy would ever look at them the same way again. The galaxy was no longer the same after the humans showed their true strength. What was once a place of quiet diplomacy and silent power struggles had now become a space filled with whispers of fear, tension, and deep uncertainty. Everywhere, governments held emergency meetings, fleets stood ready, and news channels replayed the message of the human monolith again and again. But the humans had gone quiet after their message, withdrawing from Veltrax territory without further bloodshed, leaving behind ruins, silence, and a lesson. They had not claimed territory. They had not demanded tribute. They had not even asked for apologies. They had simply walked away, leaving the galaxy to decide what it would do next. That silence, more than any battle, became a storm in the minds of those who had watched from the shadows. Empires that once mocked humanity now triple-checked their defenses. Races that once dismissed Earth as primitive now reviewed every file, every report, and every forgotten encounter, hoping to understand what they had missed. But no one had answers. The fear had spread faster than any fleet could move. Fear of what else humans were capable of. Fear of what would happen if they were ever truly threatened again. And fear of what had already awakened within them. For the first time in centuries, the Galactic High Council met in complete secrecy, their hall dimly lit and guarded by warships from multiple species, none of whom trusted each other anymore. The topic was clear: what should be done about the humans? There was no agreement. Some believed it was better to stay quiet and avoid provoking them further. Others whispered about forming secret alliances to prepare for the next human move. A few even suggested a dangerous plan: try to find the hidden weaknesses of Earth before it was too late. But deep down, none of them had the courage to strike first again. Because they all knew what the Veltrax had learned too late: humans did not fight because they wanted to conquer. They fought because they remembered. And if pushed, they never forgot. That realization caused a quiet panic to spread. Borders closed. Trade routes were canceled. Trust between species began to crack. Even longtime allies looked at each other with suspicion now. Because fear changes everything. It doesn't just make enemies, it destroys friendships, poisons peace, and builds walls where bridges once stood. And yet, Earth remained quiet. No more fleets launched. No more messages sent. Their systems returned to routine, and their diplomats, while polite, carried a different energy, now a calm confidence that made others nervous. They didn't need to threaten anyone anymore. Their silence was enough. Their presence in a room made even the oldest empires reconsider their words. One human ambassador stood at a council meeting and said only this: "We hope no one ever gives us a reason to remind them again." That sentence alone echoed through systems like a thunderclap. Suddenly, everyone was watching humanity, not as newcomers, but as the power no one dared to test again. But with fear came consequences. Small disputes between lesser-known species turned into full conflicts as they tried to show they were still strong. Old grudges resurfaced. And behind it all was a silent understanding: if anyone tried to use humans or trick them into another war, it could end everything. So the galaxy stood still, pretending everything was normal, while underneath, the fear continued to grow. On the Veltrax homeworld, survivors tried to rebuild, but they spoke less now. Children who had once played in the streets now asked about the ghost soldiers from Earth. Elders who had supported the first attack on the human colony now wept in silence. Their skies were clear again, but their hearts were not. Fear had taken root not only in governments, but in the minds of common people. And as the weeks turned to months, the biggest question was no longer what humans would do, but what fear itself would create. Because fear doesn't need weapons to destroy. It breaks trust. It stops progress. It makes every movement look like a threat. And now, entire star systems had changed how they lived because of the humans. Even though the humans hadn't said a word since their last message, they had become a symbol, not just of strength, but of the cost of arrogance. And that symbol had powered dangerous power.in secret labs. Some species began experimenting with forbidden technologies, desperate to create a defense if the humans ever returned in force. In hidden corners of the galaxy, pirate groups and mercenaries whispered about working together to avoid becoming the next Veltrax. But none of it brought peace. The galaxy was now ruled by fear, and it wasn't the humans who had done it, it was the reaction to them. The consequences were not explosions or invasions, they were silence, mistrust, and the slow breakdown of everything the galaxy once thought was stable. And Earth, watching from afar, knew this. They saw the fear. They understood its price. And they prepared, not to conquer, but to survive what fear might create next. Because sometimes the most dangerous weapon isn't a ship or a soldier, it's the idea that someone out there cannot be stopped. And the world must live with the memory of what happened when someone tried.